Hello PICA fans, welcome back to the weekly recap. My name is Bob and Fishy and I'm filling in for RedMat80 this week. He's been a little bit busy and I volunteered, so we are going to be looking at week 8 of season 3 of PICA. We're going to be going over all the matches, all the playoff implications that those matches have, as well as the MVP race and all that good stuff. Anyway, let's go ahead and start things up. We had one no contest this week. This was a match between the Denver Dashers and Iowa Focus Energy. Unfortunately, the Focus Energy had to forfeit the match, which gives a 3-0 win to the Denver Dashers. Now, this actually has a little bit of playoff implications for it. The Iowa Focus Energy were the last team that could potentially challenge for a playoff spot in the Hoenn Conference. Unfortunately, with this loss, that does take them out of playoff contention, and it means that all of the teams that were frontrunners in the playoff race over there are officially locked in for playoff spots. So the rest of the games for the, from here on out are just going to determine who is going to be taking, number 1 seed, all that good stuff, and basically just who plays who in the playoffs. But the Denver Dashers, with this win, have officially put the final nail in the coffin. They are going to the playoffs. So congratulations to them, and we're going to go ahead and move on to our first official match of the week. This is going to be my team, the Philly Shuckles, versus the DMR Shadow Absols. Shuckles brought a team of Thunderous Therian, Rotom Cut, Suicune, Mega Banette, Nidoqueen, and Jirachi to face the DMR Shadow Absol's Thundurus Incarnate, Mega Slowbro, Mew, Doublade, Mandibuzz, and Chandelure. Now, the DMR Shadow Absols have a really difficult time in this matchup. The Shuckles have 2 very powerful electric types, previously 3 when they had their match earlier in the season, but Shuckles traded off Mega Manectric. But still, 2 very powerful electric types, and the Absols don't actually have a potent electric resist. Their only electric resist on their entire team is Electrode, and that's not a really good resist just because it doesn't have any sort of bulk. So they really have to look to find bulk, neutral bulk, in the rest of their team, predominantly their Mew. Now, unfortunately, they don't have an amazing matchup for the rest of the team either. They don't really have a good water resist other than Mega Slowbro, and as previously stated, Shuckles have very powerful threats to deal with Mega Slowbro. Not only are there 2 electric types, they've also got Zoroark, Mega Banette, which can't really deal with it as well as some other things could, but it can definitely stop setup, and all that good stuff. Basically, Mega Slowbro is going to be really hampered in this battle, and that is their only water resist, so Suicune could potentially be an issue for them. That said, they do have things like Mandibuzz and Doublade to deal with Mega Banette, and Thundurus Incarnate to potentially deal with Suicune, but generally speaking, they're still going to have a really difficult time with that. Anyway, this was a 2-0 in favor of the Shuckles, and it really came about not because of the electric types, but because Nidoqueen, once Mega Slowbro and Mew were out of the way, Nidoqueen had a very good matchup against the remainder of Cedric's team. And that really, the only thing that allowed them to stay in the fight as well as they did was their general bulk between like Mew, Mandibuzz, Doublade, and Mega Slowbro. But once those things got whittled down, Nidoqueen was able to just kind of sweep through the team towards the end. Got rocks up early, that really helped them, and yeah, the Shuckles take this one 2-0, and that secures their playoff spot. So the Shuckles will be headed to the playoffs, as well as the Dashers, and we're going to go ahead and continue on for the season and see who else made the playoffs, because all the other teams that were in playoff contention, they actually are going to be locking in their slots this week. So, moving on, we've got the Detroit Magnetons versus Richmond Rayquazas. Now, the Rayquazas won this one 2-0. They brought a team of Serperior, Keldeo, Lucario, Cofagrigus, Licky, and Skuntank to deal with the Detroit Magnetons' Tornadus, Therian, Rayco, Flygon, Klinkling, Mamoswine, and Mega Swampert. Interesting thing to note, the Detroit Magnetons elected not to bring a rain team. They do have the potential to bring a very heavy rain-based offense team. They decided not to against Dom and the Richmond Rayquazas, and unfortunately, I think that was it didn't necessarily go the way they wanted it to. I think they were just looking for a general kind of all-around good team, but Dom had pretty much everything scouted. Now, the Detroit Magnetons let their Mamoswine die very early on. It actually lost in a one-on-one match with Licky, as Licky was able to set up a Swords Dance and just take it down. Mamoswine went for a knockoff early. It did next to nothing, and really wasn't able to come back from that. So, their Mamoswine, which would have been a very, very good threat, generally speaking, against Superior, really hits hard with the Ice Shard. Against Lucario can't switch in for fear of Earthquake. Skuntank really doesn't do well against it. And even Cofagrigus can eat up hits, but still, it's not going to want to take that Earthquake if it doesn't have to. Generally speaking, it would have been very good to keep that alive, but unfortunately they lost it really, really early. Now, Lucario had priority in the form of Extreme Speed, and I'm assuming maybe Bullet Punch as well. And that was able to really put a lot of pressure on the Magnetons because they knew they couldn't let their stuff get whittled down too much for fear of just getting picked off by those priority users. And that's pretty much what Dom was counting on. He kept that thing in the back, was hoping to just clean up late game with it. And one of the main reasons that he was able to do that was actually Tornadus T came in against Cofagrigus twice in the endgame and tried to U-turn out on it. Unfortunately, it had its Regenerator ability overwritten by Mummy, and that actually really kept it from gaining any HP back as it switched out, and left it pretty easy pickings for the rest of Dom's team. That was really important late game. Now, Colton did manage to put a little bit of pressure on Dom with his Reco. It was a sub-com mindset, and he came in on a Skuntank, which was going for Sucker Punch. So that was actually really good good prep on Colton's part. Unfortunately, he didn't elect to set up as much as he potentially could have, and only got to +1/+1 as his sub was broken, which left him not necessarily super weak or super susceptible to Dom's Pokemon, but it could have been set up a lot more than it was, and it ended up having to switch out. It came in later, but just wasn't as effective as it could have been. It did still net 3 kills, though, so that's pretty impressive. Anyways, like I said, the Detroit Magnetons lose this one. The Richmond Rayquazas win it 2-0, and that's going to lock in a playoff spot for Dom and the Richmond Rayquazas. So congratulations to him. He's currently in the lead of the Ruby division, but Philly Shuckles are still within any sort of threatening range. So he's going to have to keep his eyes out. But he does have that playoff spot. So even if he doesn't play necessarily super well, he is going to be making the playoffs, and he can focus on that. Anyways, let's go ahead and go to the next match, and this was a really, really highly anticipated match. The Washington Red Shells in the rematch versus the Indus Valley Infernapes. Now, the Indus Valley Infernapes didn't have the best record going into this, but in the previous matchup between these two, the Infernapes would have won if it wasn't for a little bit of hacks. And keep in mind, the Washington Red Shells, arguably the best team in the league. They've been on such a hot streak recently. They've 6-0'd their last 2 opponents. So let's go ahead and see what they brought. Now, the Washington Red Shells ended up bringing Latias, Mega Scizor, Florges, Tornadus Incarnate, Greninja, and Tauros against the Indus Valley Infernapes, Rotom Heat, Conkeldurr, Vaporeon, Mega Venusaur, Bisharp, and Snorlax. Now, the Washington Red Shells ended up bringing a lot of setup. They brought Latias, Florges, and I think Tornadus were all setup sweepers. And Rohith of the Indus Valley Infernapes really was able to not let them set up. I think he did a very effective job in that. And he actually ended up picking up a 4-0 win against the Washington Red Shells, which really knocks them back down to earth. They were so far ahead of every other team in their, not only their division, but also their conference in general. This loss really, really knocks them back into the range where other teams could potentially knock them off that pedestal. So, major takeaways from this match. Rohith's planning was very, very good, and he had a lot of very, very good threats. His team is overall just incredibly well balanced. He ended up bringing Choice Banded Snorlax, which really threw Matt off his game really early, knocking out the Florges in 2 hits of, I want to say, Body Slam. And Matt was really just struggling to regain momentum from that point on. Rotom Heat was a really good switch-in for Scizor. Matt didn't really predict the switch-in and go for a superpower if he had it, or U-turn potentially. And Rotom was really just able to switch in every time and just get a Volt Switch off, get some momentum, or get some initiative, as, of course, Matt had to switch his Scizor out. And, of course, Mega Venusaur dealt with Greninja reasonably well. Greninja was carrying the extra sensory, which did about half. But in the match, Mega Venusaur was able to just knock out Greninja. Now, there was an instance, not of hacks, but actually a lack of hacks that worked against Matt. When he brought in his Latias against the Infernape's Vaporeon, it actually went for a Scald. And the Scald did not pick up a burn, which actually ended up being really important because Vaporeon was then able to go for a Toxic and really put a lot of pressure on this Latias, make it so it really couldn't set up and sweep in any way, really, and it had to keep switching out. Now, unfortunately for Matt, he really didn't want to have to switch that Latias out. He wanted that to be one of his long-term bulky Pokemon, but that Toxic really, really worked against it. And later on, Rotom was able to burn Tauros, which really pretty much put the final nail in the coffin. The Infernapes were able to really control the game almost completely from beginning to end. They definitely earned this win. So, congratulations to the Indus Valley Infernapes, first of all. But even with this loss, the Washington Red Shells do have their playoff position clinched. They are going to be going to the playoffs with a record of 6-2 currently. So, congratulations to the Red Shells on making the playoffs. Congratulations to the Infernapes for beating a very, very powerful challenger. If they're going to be coming back to next season, which I very much hope they do, this win's going to give them a lot of confidence. They know they can team build really well, and they know they can play well, when they need to. I think that they're definitely going to be a big threat going forward. So next match, we're going to be going over to the Sinnoh Conference. First off, we've got the Transylvania Trevenants versus LA Slowkings. These are two of the lowest ranked teams in the league. I think the Trevenants have like 1 or 2 wins on the season. The Slowkings don't have any. And that's, it's something that happens. I mean, if there's as many dominant teams as there are, there's going to be a couple of underneath teams, unfortunately. But anyway, the Trevenants did pick up a win against the Slowkings earlier in this season. They were looking to repeat, and of course the Slowkings were looking to make sure that didn't happen again. Slowkings ended up bringing a team of Miencho, Mega Gardevoir, Shuckle, Scrafty, Lantern, and Excadrill against the Transylvania Trevenants Kyurem, Crawdaunt, Landorus Therian, Mega Blastoise, Zebstrika, and Aromatisse. Now, this is actually, as far as I'm aware, the first game that the LA Slowkings brought a standard Shuckle set. They usually try to bring some sort of Shell Smash set. Standard Shuckle actually did a lot for them. It got Rocks up, it got Sticky Webs up, and it managed to Toxic the Crawdaunt of the Transylvania Trevenants, and actually went down at the same time, which was a double down, which was exactly what the Slowkings needed their Shuckle to do. Unfortunately, they weren't able to capitalize on it. They ended up losing this one 2-0 to the Trevenants. They kind of made a bunch of really strange plays, staying in with things like Scrafty and Mega Gardevoir, and just kind of condemning those Pokemon to die. And unfortunately, he really wasn't able to, make the most of their sacrifice. He had a couple of situations where he had his Excadrill in against things that were weak to Iron Head and just didn't click it. I guess he was fearing the Zebstrika switch in. But honestly, if you're in against Aromatisse or Kyurem, which he was, and don't click Iron Head, Zebstrika is really not going to take those hits. I think that if he had just gone for Iron Head, done some big damage to Zebstrika, and then switched out, he would have definitely put himself in a really good position for later in the game. He had webs up, and so he would have been able to get 2 hits off. And honestly, just getting that damage in would have been a lot more important than preserving the health on his Excadrill. I think it was Scarfed. I think that's why he was a little bit trepidatious. He didn't want to necessarily, lock himself into that Iron Head. But honestly, I think he definitely would have won if he had just gone for it. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't, and he ends up having his Excadrill knocked out by Kyurem with an Earth Power, which kind of sealed the deal for him. The other thing that sealed the deal for him, he did not have Poison Jab on Miencho, so he was not able to knock out the Aromatisse. Aromatisse ends up just being able to protect from the High Jump Kick, and then scoring a lucky High Jump Kick miss, but would have just been able to knock that out with Moonblast towards the end. So I think that this was a game that the Trevenants maybe necessarily didn't play to win, but they played solid enough not to lose, and the Slowkings more lost this game to themselves than lost it to Vec, which is unfortunate. I can definitely see them, eventually managing a win. They've got 2 weeks left to do it, and their team is threatening enough. I mean, between Mega Gardevoir and Excadrill, that's definitely some big threats. And honestly, if certain teams can't deal with Scrafty, then it can potentially sweep very easily. But they've only got the 2 weeks left to pick up a win and salvage the season. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on to the next match. This was the Berkhamsted Bastiodons versus the Oneonta Quagsires. Now, the Quagsires don't have the best record, but they are still within arm's reach of the playoffs if they can win every game here on. So this was kind of big for them. The Bastiodons have already clinched their division just because the other teams in their division don't have the best records. But they still want to win their matches. They've been on a little bit of a skid. They've lost the last 2 matches in a row. Now, granted, these were against good teams, but still, you don't want to lose 2 matches in a row. So they were definitely looking to pick up a win. They ended up bringing a team of Garchomp, Tentacruel, Bastiodon, Dragonite. I know, shocking, they haven't brought those to every match. As well as Medicham and Whimsicott. So they've pretty much got their usual core. They usually like to bring these Pokemon to most of their matches. The Quagsires brought a team of Zapdos, Donphan, Amoonguss, Sawk, Milotic, and Volcarona. Now, this is obviously... The Bastiodons have a lot of very, very potent physical threats, and unfortunately for the Quagsires, they don't have a ton of long-term bulk on their Donphan. Obviously, Donphan can take a couple of physical hits, but it doesn't have any sort of reliable recovery, so they ended up going with more of an offensive Donphan, which I found pretty interesting. Unfortunately, it didn't really do as much as it could have, and the rest of the team, it managed to get a couple of kills on a couple of his guys, but generally speaking... This was really all Bastiodons. They had their opponents pretty well scouted, I'd say. They had safety goggles on Tentacruel so that it could come in against Amoonguss and potentially set up some spikes or T-spikes or something. I'm not really sure what they were doing with that. They did have the, oh gosh, what's it called? Acid Spray to try and wear down the defenses of Milotic. But unfortunately for them, actually, that kind of ended up hurting them. Milotic had the Mirror Coat, which was really interesting to see it knock out Tentacruel with Mirror Coat. But generally speaking, the Bastiodons were able to just overwhelm their opponents. And towards the end, the Weakness Policy Donphan scored a crit 1 turn too early. If they had scored a crit on the final turn of the match, it wouldn't have been the final turn of the match. They would have actually been able to potentially sweep with that. Unfortunately, they scored a crit the turn before Weakness Policy activated, so they did about 60% to the Whimsicott. Whimsicott was able to Giga Drain, do 90% to Donphan, and activate the Weakness Policy. And then another Ice Shard didn't do quite enough to KO the Whimsicott. So, it was kind of an interesting thing. Obviously, that 1 turn difference between those crits really came in to hurt the Quagsires. I'm not sure statistically if they've been eliminated from the playoffs, but they are very far out of playoff contention. They're really going to have to hope for a lot of losses on the part of some of their conference rivals to make it into the playoffs this season, which is unfortunate, but it does open the door for a lot of those other teams to potentially make the playoffs. So we're going to go ahead and look at a couple of these potential playoff teams right now. So the next matchup, this was probably the match of the week in my opinion, the Sequim Malamars versus Vespiquen Park Rangers. Now both of these teams going into this had the same record, and they were both looking to basically take over their division. Obviously, if you win your division, it's guaranteed playoff spot as opposed to fighting for a wildcard spot. So both of these guys were looking to exercise a bit of dominance in their division. Now, in the previous match this season, the Vespiquen Park Rangers took a win over the Sequim Malamars 4-0. So the Malamars looking to bounce back from that, pick up a little bit of revenge against the Rangers. And, yeah, they were definitely at the top of their game, in my opinion, in terms of team building. So, Sequim Malamars brought a team of Gligar, Noivern, Sylveon, Espeon, Rotom Wash, and Volcanion against the Vespiquen Park Rangers' Slowking, Hydreigon, Hippowdon, Infernape, Stoutland, and Crobat. Now, against the Vespiquen Park Rangers team, Noivern was a massive, massive threat. They had one Pokemon that could come in against it, and it really didn't want to take repeated U-turns, and that was the Slowking. Now, it was an Assault Vest Slowking, so it could eat up pretty much any special hit that was thrown its way, and potentially throw some very good, super effective moves back. Obviously, Slowking has very, very good coverage in terms of just coverage moves. So, Slowking and Noivern were kind of at odds in this match. Noivern ended up picking up 4 kills against the Park Rangers. Unfortunately, it was not enough. Everything pretty much got toxic in this match. It was a really, really good match, honestly. But the Slowking was always there to harass it, threaten it out, and potentially do some damage. we ended up seeing, this was a 76-turn match. So if you haven't watched it, definitely go check that match out in its entirety. It was an absolute war of attrition. I think at least 5 different Pokemon were toxic over the course of it. And it was really interesting. Pretty much every bulky wall had been toxic. That goes for the Gligar, which did not carry the immunity in this. I don't know if that was a gaffe in team building or if he was thinking maybe he wanted Sandvale to potentially deal with Hippowdon or something. But Gligar was toxic, Sylveon was toxic. I want to say, I don't think Volcanion or Rotom were, but I know Slowking was, Hydreigon was. Hydreigon was actually in a more bulky role this match, which was really interesting. Honestly, usually when you think about Hydreigon, you think, okay, very potent offensive Mon, usually especially offensive. But in this one, it was in more of a bulky role, just utilizing its resistances. So that was really interesting. And what else was toxic? Something else. I think that was it. But anyway, yeah, both of these teams had a really, really good bulky core. We didn't actually see any rocks get set up, which allowed this match to go very, very long. Anyway, the Vespiquen Park Rangers ended up taking this one with a 1-0 victory. Like I said, very, very good match. This is the match of the week, so go ahead, check it out on the spreadsheet, and you can make your analysis yourself. But in my opinion, the Sequim Malamars ended up playing a little bit too cautious with their Rotom Wash. They ended up going for Volt Switch rather than Hydro Pump on the Infernape towards the end of the match. If they had gone Hydro Pump, they would have won because Slowking would have had to come in. They could have Pain Split on that and just let Toxic wear it down a bit. But instead, they ended up losing out because of that, and it was honestly, it was a bit of a shame to see that go that way. But Vespiquen Park Rangers do pull ahead in their division. They've got a 6-2 record. They're going to be looking to maintain dominance over their division. However, they are up against 2 very, very good teams in the remainder of the season. The Shamrock Snovers, who are within fingertips reach of taking that spot over for themselves, and the Gotham Golbats, who actually beat them earlier on in the season. So 2 matches that you can definitely look forward to. And the Sequim Malamars, they definitely have an opportunity to bounce back against 2 teams that they have beaten earlier in this season. So obviously, if they can do that again, they can potentially pick up those wins. If all does not go right for the Park Rangers, they could very, very potentially take over their division. And they're both probably going to be making the playoffs. So that's really, really interesting. Anyway, moving on, we've got the last match of the week, the Shamrock Snovers versus Gotham Golbats. There isn't a lot to say in this match. In my opinion, the Golbats, well, let's just go over the Pokemon that were brought. The Golbats brought a team of Victini, Mega Altaria, Empoleon, Latios, Scolipede, and Virizion to deal with the Shamrock Snovers' Klefki, Porygon 2, Manaphy, Celebi, Druddigon, and Mega Ampharos. And let's just say it did not deal with it well. They really didn't have a lot to deal with the Thunder Wave on both Porygon 2 and Klefki, just slowing their Pokemon down and really just being able to whittle them down really, really early. Mega Altaria tried to set up early on and got T-Waved for its efforts and really wasn't able to do a lot. Druddigon and Virizion actually had an interesting double down where Druddigon had, or I don't know if it was Druddigon itself, something had toxicked the Virizion early on, and Druddigon had both Rough Skin and Rocky Helmet to just wear down any physical threats. Virizion was in there. It had to go for close combat to deal some damage to Druddigon. They both ended up dying that turn, and unfortunately for the Gotham Golbats, Virizion was really their only major threat to Porygon 2, and after that, Porygon 2 was able to, with a little bit of maneuvering, Porygon 2 was able to come in and get pretty much a late game sweep. It wasn't just a set up a couple of times and sweep the entire team. It was more of a just, Thunder Wave everything as it came in, slow it down, you got Recover on there, just kind of poke everything until it dies type of sweep. It was really, really painful for the Golbats, but you know what? That's what Porygon 2 does, and the Snovers used it very, very effectively in this match. So they ended up picking up the, what was it, a 5-0 win? Yeah, I think it was. And that is absolutely devastating for the Golbats. I don't think they had a chance at making the playoffs going into this one, but you know, you still want to win these matches against your division rivals, and unfortunately they weren't able to pick up that win against the Snovers, which means that the Snovers are probably going to be making the playoffs, depending on how everything shakes out for the rest of the season. So congratulations to them on their win, big win, and let's go ahead and go to the week's MVP. Obviously, this week's MVP, Porygon 2, 5 kills, no deaths. This is, honestly, it was just very impressive. Porygon 2 can potentially be one of the more just annoying general threats, and especially if you don't have knockoff like the Golbats did not elect to bring. Porygon 2 was able to just beat up their entire team, and actually, with that, it jumps to the top of the overall MVP race with an overall record of 13-4. That's really impressive, honestly. So that takes the number 1 slot over. In second, we've got Keldeo at 9-2. Following that, Slowking, also 9-2, so that's a little bit of a tie for second. Behind that is Latias of the Washington Red Shells at 9-3. Behind them, Mega Sableye 8-2. Thunderous Therian 7-1. Blissey, at 9-4. Mega Scizor 9-4. Tornadus Therian 8-3. And finally, Porygon Z at 5-0. So that's going to be it for the week itself. But we do have a little bit of a look at what is potentially going to be going on in the playoffs. We can look at our playoff contenders right now and see what they're up to. So in the Hoenn Conference, the playoff picture is basically, it's pretty similar all around. Every team that I'm about to list off has an overall record of 6-2. So a lot of very, very potent teams. First off, we've got the Washington Red Shells, 6-2 plus 17 differential. That's really impressive. Even with that 4-0 loss, they still have that insane differential. Behind them, the Denver Dashers at 6-2 plus 15. So they are right there. They're right behind the Red Shells. And they've got a match against the Red Shells coming up. This could be really, really interesting if you're looking at that. That's the Sapphire Division. And both of those teams are actually ahead of the Ruby Division's top teams. On top of the Ruby Division, we've got the Richmond Rayquazas 6-2 with a plus 13 differential. And behind them, the Philly Shuckles 6-2 plus 9. And the Richmond Rayquazas and Philly Shuckles are going to be playing in Week 10. So look forward to that. We can potentially see a fight for the Ruby Division. Over on the Sinnoh Conference, things are a little bit less clear, but still pretty clear, honestly. We've got the Berkhamsted Bastiodons leading the Diamond Division with a 6-2 record and plus 13 differential. Behind them, the Oneonta Quagsires with 3-5 record and a -9 differential. Statistically, I don't think they're technically eliminated, but they're really going to have to win and win big in their final matches. Over on the other side of things in the Pearl Division, Vespiquen Park Rangers 6-2 plus 15. That's really impressive. But right behind them, the Sequim Malamars and Shamrock Snovers. Malamars are 5-3 plus 6. Snovers are 5-3 plus 3. Both of those teams are going to be looking to get some wins as we go forward. Potentially against, in the Snovers case, against both of those teams. For the Malamars, they're going to be looking to beat the Snovers and the Golbats, as are the Park Rangers. And that's kind of an interesting, 3-horse race, but in all honesty, those teams are all probably going to make the playoffs, so that's probably going to be your playoff picture. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this little recap. Hopefully we didn't go too long. And, yeah, I'm super excited to see the PICA season go on, so hopefully you are too. With that said, hopefully Matt will be back for the next week's recap, and if he is, tell him I said hi. If not, I might be back, depending. And, yeah, that's how we're going to end it. See you later, guys.